In September of 1959, one of the most devastating natural disasters in Japanese history struck the nation, Typhoon Vera. It would go on to become the deadliest typhoon to ever hit Japan, leaving behind a path of destruction that would change the lives of millions. The typhoon's powerful winds, which reached speeds of up to 160 miles per hour, and relentless rainfall wreaked havoc on communities, infrastructure, and families across the country. It made landfall on September 26th, with its fury felt most intensely in the central and western regions of Japan. Typhoon Vera began its journey in the western Pacific Ocean on September 20th. It started as a low-pressure system, a common precursor to typhoons, but rapidly strengthened, gaining intensity as it moved toward Japan. The storm's trajectory was almost perfectly aligned to bring it over Japan's main islands. The warm waters of the Pacific Ocean fed the storm, making it grow even stronger as it neared land. By the time it hit Japan, it was already classified as a super typhoon, a term used for storms with sustained winds over 150 miles per hour. The typhoon's impact was felt across a vast area. One of the hardest hit regions was the city of Nagoya, which was submerged by the immense storm surge. The water flooded entire neighborhoods, leaving residents trapped in their homes with no way to escape the rising floodwaters. Along with the storm surge, the relentless rainfall caused rivers to overflow, leading to widespread flooding in towns and villages. As the typhoon roared through, the power was knocked out in many areas, and communication lines were cut off, making rescue efforts even more difficult. The destruction was widespread. Entire communities were decimated, with thousands of homes washed away by the floodwaters or destroyed by the ferocious winds. The physical toll was catastrophic, but the emotional and psychological impact was just as severe. Many people were forced to flee their homes, abandoning everything they had. In some cases, families were separated, unsure if they would ever see their loved ones again. As the storm raged on, the people of Japan found themselves at the mercy of nature's fury. Typhoon Vera's aftermath was nothing short of catastrophic. The official death toll would eventually rise to over 5,000, and many more were injured. The storm left millions of people homeless, displaced by the widespread destruction. Beyond the physical damage to homes and buildings, the typhoon also devastated Japan's economy. With so many industries impacted, people found themselves without jobs and livelihoods, and the country faced a long and difficult recovery process. It would take years for the country to rebuild, and the emotional scars left by the disaster would linger long after the physical damage was repaired. In the immediate aftermath of the typhoon, the Japanese government and emergency services faced immense challenges. The storm's power had left many areas completely inaccessible, and it was days before emergency workers could reach the worst-hit regions. The scale of the disaster was overwhelming, and at first there was little anyone could do to help. People relied on each other for survival, with neighbors coming together to help those in need. Despite the challenges, the resilience of the Japanese people began to shine through as they started the slow and painful process of recovery. Typhoon Vera's legacy would have a profound impact on Japan. It led to changes in disaster preparedness and response, with the government implementing more robust early warning systems and evacuation protocols. While the storm brought unspeakable tragedy, it also shaped the way Japan would handle future natural disasters. The lessons learned from Typhoon Vera continue to influence how the nation prepares for typhoons and other natural events today. The moment Typhoon Vera made landfall on September 26, 1959, it was clear that this storm would leave a mark on history. With winds roaring at over 160 miles per hour and relentless rains, the impact was felt almost immediately. The typhoon's arrival was terrifying, as it came ashore with a force rarely seen in Japan's history. The combination of the high winds and torrential rainfall created a deadly scenario, with homes, roads, and entire towns being wiped away in a matter of hours. In the days leading up to the typhoon's arrival, the government had issued warnings and urged people to evacuate coastal areas, but the scale of the disaster was far beyond what anyone had anticipated. As the storm slammed into Japan's central and western regions, the damage was not just from the winds, but also from the storm surge, which caused flooding in areas that were not even directly hit by the typhoon's winds. The surge brought massive waves that inundated towns along the coast, sweeping away anything in its path. Entire neighborhoods were submerged, and the floodwaters rose quickly, making it difficult for anyone to escape. One of the most shocking consequences of Typhoon Vera was the disruption of Japan's infrastructure. Roads, bridges, and railways were destroyed, leaving many people stranded in places that were difficult or impossible to reach, In some areas, the floodwaters were so deep that they cut off entire communities, leaving people without access to food, water, or medical care. The loss of power across vast areas meant that communications were cut off, making it nearly impossible for rescue teams to coordinate. For those in affected regions, the isolation was a terrifying experience, with no idea when help would arrive. The survivors of Typhoon Vera were left with unimaginable challenges. Many people had lost everything: homes, possessions, and in some cases, loved ones. The typhoon had torn apart the very fabric of communities, and the survivors faced the difficult task of rebuilding not only their homes, but their lives. The sense of loss was overwhelming, and many were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. For those who had escaped the worst of the storm, the trauma of what they had witnessed was something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. In the aftermath, the damage was so extensive that Japan struggled to assess the full extent of the destruction. In some regions, it would take days, even weeks, before the true impact of the storm became clear. The country was forced to rely on whatever resources were available to begin recovery efforts. Emergency shelters were set up and relief teams worked tirelessly to provide food, water, and medical assistance. Despite these efforts, the scale of the devastation meant that it would take months, if not years, for the country to fully recover. Japan's government would later face intense scrutiny over its preparedness for such a massive disaster, but in the immediate aftermath, the focus was on survival and recovery. As Japan began the slow process of rebuilding, the emotional scars of Typhoon Vera remained. Survivors often spoke of the horror they had experienced, from the deafening winds to the terror of watching their homes be destroyed by floodwaters. The stories of loss and survival were heartbreaking, and many felt that their lives would never be the same. Yet through all the devastation, there was also a sense of hope. The people of Japan came together to help one another, showing incredible resilience in the face of disaster. It was this strength and determination that would help Japan rise from the ashes of Typhoon Vera and begin the long process of recovery. The lessons learned from Typhoon Vera would go on to shape Japan's disaster preparedness strategy for years to come. While the nation would never forget the horror of that day, the tragedy would also push for advancements in forecasting, evacuation protocols, and response systems. Typhoon Vera's legacy was not just about the lives lost and the destruction left behind, but also about the changes it spurred in how Japan would face future natural disasters. As Typhoon Vera continued its devastating path across Japan, it left behind a trail of destruction that was hard to comprehend. The hardest hit areas were those in central Japan, where cities like Nagoya were caught in the full force of the storm. The damage was so severe that the city, once bustling and full of life, was reduced to a scene of chaos and despair. The floodwaters rose so high that they submerged buildings, streets, and entire neighborhoods. People trapped in their homes were forced to seek higher ground, many of them losing everything they had worked for. In the wake of the typhoon's fury, rescue efforts became an urgent priority. However, the damage to the infrastructure made it difficult for emergency services to reach the most affected areas. Roads were impassable, railways were down, and airports were rendered useless due to the widespread flooding and destruction. For many survivors, the first few days after the storm were marked by uncertainty and fear. They were isolated and cut off from the outside world with little hope of immediate help. One of the most heart-wrenching aspects of the aftermath was the sheer number of people who had lost their lives. The death toll, which eventually surpassed 5,000, was a grim reminder of the typhoon's destructive power. In addition to the loss of life, there was also the immense damage to property, which left millions homeless. Families who had once lived comfortably found themselves displaced and without shelter, while businesses were forced to shut down as they struggled to rebuild. Entire communities were left devastated, and the task of recovery seemed nearly impossible. The damage to agriculture was another significant consequence of the typhoon. Fields of crops, which were vital to the livelihoods of many rural communities, were washed away by the floodwaters. This loss of crops added to the already dire situation, as food shortages became a concern in many areas. With the infrastructure in ruins, transportation of supplies was slow, and many people were left without the essentials they needed to survive. The local economy, which had already been strained by the storm, faced even further setbacks as businesses struggled to get back on their feet. Despite the overwhelming challenges, the people of Japan did not give up. As the days passed and the waters receded, the survivors began to rebuild their homes and their lives. Volunteers from across the country arrived to help with the recovery efforts, providing food, water, and medical assistance to those in need. The government worked tirelessly to restore basic services like electricity and clean water, though it would take time for many areas to fully recover. The emotional toll on the survivors was also immense. Many had lost loved ones, and the trauma of witnessing such devastation was something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The stories of those who lived through the storm were filled with heartache and loss, but they also reflected the strength of the human spirit. People came together to support one another, offering whatever help they could to those in need. While the scars of Typhoon Vera would remain for years, the resilience and solidarity of the Japanese people became a beacon of hope in the face of tragedy. Typhoon Vera also marked a turning point in Japan's approach to disaster management. The scale of the destruction revealed the vulnerabilities in the country's infrastructure and emergency response systems. It was clear that more needed to be done to prepare for such devastating events in the future. The government, alongside experts in meteorology and disaster management, began to focus on improving early warning systems, enhancing evacuation plans, and strengthening the infrastructure to withstand future storms. These lessons learned from the tragedy of Typhoon Vera would go on to save countless lives in the years to come. The recovery process from Typhoon Vera was long and difficult, but it laid the foundation for a stronger, more resilient Japan. The lessons learned from the disaster were not just about how to prepare for future storms, but also about the importance of community and the strength of people coming together in times of crisis. The impact of Typhoon Vera would be felt for decades, but its legacy also served as a reminder of the importance of preparedness, unity, and hope in the face of adversity. As the months passed and the initial shock of Typhoon Vera's destruction began to fade, Japan's recovery continued at a slow and painstaking pace. The immediate focus was on providing shelter, food, and medical care to the millions of people left homeless or displaced. Relief efforts were in full swing, with both the government and private organizations working tirelessly to deliver aid to those in need. Temporary shelters were set up in schools, community centers, and other public buildings where survivors could find safety and support. However, the real challenge lay in rebuilding homes, schools, and businesses that had been destroyed in the storm. The Japanese government took a central role in coordinating the recovery efforts, focusing on clearing debris, restoring essential infrastructure like water and power supplies, and rebuilding transportation networks. Roads and bridges that had been swept away by the floodwaters were rebuilt, and damaged railways were repaired to allow for the movement of goods and people. The recovery was far from easy, and many areas remained in ruins for weeks or even months after the typhoon had passed. Yet despite these difficulties, Japan showed a remarkable ability to rebound from such a catastrophic event. One of the most significant aspects of the post-Typhoon Vera recovery was the shift in Japan's approach to disaster preparedness and response. The scale of the devastation had exposed critical weaknesses in the country's ability to handle such disasters, particularly in the areas of early warning systems and emergency management. In the years following the typhoon, Japan implemented major changes to its disaster preparedness programs. New infrastructure was built to withstand the impact of future typhoons, and the government introduced more advanced weather monitoring systems to provide earlier warnings to residents in danger zones. These improvements were aimed at ensuring that future storms would not have the same devastating impact. The emotional toll on the survivors of Typhoon Vera also left a lasting mark on the nation. Many people carried the trauma of losing loved ones or witnessing the destruction of their communities. However, in the face of this pain, the strength and resilience of the Japanese people shone through. Community groups, local volunteers, and national organizations came together to support those who had lost everything, offering assistance in the form of food, clothing, and financial aid. The recovery was not only a physical one, but also an emotional one, as the country worked to heal from the scars of the typhoon. In the years following the disaster, the memory of Typhoon Vera continued to shape Japan's approach to disaster management. The lessons learned from the storm became a crucial part of the country's disaster response strategies, with an emphasis on preparedness, quick response, and community support. Typhoon Vera was no longer just a tragic event in history. It was a turning point that led to significant improvements in how Japan dealt with natural disasters. The legacy of Typhoon Vera is still felt today, with the country continuing to invest in disaster resilience and risk reduction. The importance of building stronger infrastructure, improving early warning systems, and fostering a culture of preparedness became clear. The lessons from the typhoon, while painful, were transformative, shaping the way Japan faces future challenges from nature's unpredictable force. As Japan looks to the future, the memory of Typhoon Vera serves as both a somber reminder of the devastation that natural disasters can bring and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The country's ability to recover and rebuild after such a catastrophic event is a story of hope and strength in the face of overwhelming adversity. Typhoon. Vera may have left behind a trail of destruction, but it also sparked a movement towards a more prepared and resilient Japan, where communities are better equipped to face the challenges of the future.